Amelia Carter did not cry when the man she had traveled 400 miles to marry looked her in the eye and told the whole town she was a liar. She stood in the middle of that sun-baked street, gripping her battered valise, and she did not make a single sound. Because crying would have meant they had already won. If you've ever been dismissed before you were given a single chance to prove yourself, stay with me. Subscribe to the channel. Follow this story all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The summer of 1886 sat heavy over Caldwell, Montana. The kind of heat that pressed down on a person's shoulders and didn't let go until long after the sun had dropped behind the peaks. The mountains to the north stood dark and enormous against a sky gone pale with heat, and the town below them baked in silence. The kind of silence that small towns kept like a weapon ready to use the moment someone new walked in and gave them reason. Amelia Carter gave them plenty of reason. She had stepped off of the afternoon stage from Denver with one battered valise. A letter she'd read so many times. The fold lines had gone soft, and the name of a man she had trusted for the better part of 2 years. Gerald Whitmore. Successful merchant. Well-regarded citizen of Caldwell. A man who had written her long letters full of careful promises, who had sent train fare, who had told her in words she had believed completely that he was a man of his word. She found out different within 10 minutes of arriving. She had asked the stage driver where she might find the Whitmore Mercantile, and he had looked at her with a kind of sideways pity that she didn't understand yet, and pointed her down the main street without saying a word. She had walked the length of it with her valise in hand and her chin up because she had learned a long time ago that the moment a woman showed doubt in a new town, that town would never let her forget it. She found the Mercantile. She found Gerald Whitmore. And she found the woman standing beside him, young, well-dressed, a gold band on her left hand, and she understood all at once and without any room for doubt exactly what kind of man she had trusted. She did not scream. She did not weep on the street. She walked into that store and she said his name, and she watched the color drain from Gerald Whitmore's face as he turned and saw her standing there with his letter in her hand and her eyes steady on his. "Amelia," he said, like a man who had been caught but had already decided he wasn't going to admit to a thing. "You told me you were a man of your word," she said. "Now there's been a misunderstanding." His voice was smooth, the voice of a man who'd had practice. "I wrote to you, yes, but I don't believe I ever used the word marriage. My wife here, Dorothea, we've been married since March. Whatever you read into those letters, I'm afraid that's your own doing." His wife looked at Amelia with an expression caught between embarrassment and contempt. A small crowd had begun to gather at the doorway of the Mercantile, the way crowds always gathered in small towns when they smelled something worth watching. Amelia looked at the letter in her hand. She looked at Gerald Whitmore. "You sent me train fare," she said, "as a business arrangement. I told you there might be work available in town. If you've come expecting something else, I can't be responsible for a woman's misreading of professional correspondence." The crowd at the door shifted. Someone murmured. Someone else laughed a quiet, dismissive sound, and Amelia felt it land on her like a stone. She looked at the people watching her. Shopkeepers. Wives. A man from the bank whose expression said he'd already made his judgment. She looked at Gerald Whitmore, who had already turned partly away from her, as if the matter were closed, as if she were a door he had already shut and locked. She put the letter in her valise, and she walked out. That was when it got worse. By the time she'd reached the far end of the main street, the story had already traveled ahead of her. She didn't know how it happened the way it did in small towns like water moving downhill, finding every crack. She only knew that when she tried to ask about boarding at the only hotel in Caldwell, the woman at the desk looked at her with a hard, shuttered expression and said the rooms were full. "All of them?" Amelia asked. "All of them." She tried the rooming house on the eastern edge of town. A woman cracked the door and said she didn't take in strangers without a reference. She tried to ask about work at the dress shop. The woman inside looked her over and said she was fully staffed and likely to remain so by the time the afternoon light had gone gold and long. Amelia had been turned away from every establishment in Caldwell, Montana, and she understood without anyone having to say it plainly that Gerald Whitmore had seen to it personally. She sat down on the bench outside the post office because there was nowhere else to sit, and she looked at the mountains at the end of the road, and she thought with a clarity that surprised her that she was not going to die in this town. She was not going to beg. She was not going to give a single one of these people the satisfaction of watching her fall apart. What she was going to do, she hadn't quite worked out yet. It was the postmaster who gave her the first real piece of information that day. An older man bawled with the distracted look of someone who'd seen too many people pass through to bother judging any of them. He'd come out to sweep his and stopped when he saw her sitting there. "You're the woman who came in on the afternoon stage," he said. Not unkindly. "I am," she said. He swept for a moment. "You looking for work or just looking for somewhere to go?" "Both," she said. He leaned on his broom. "I can't help you in town. They've decided something about you already, and they'll hold to it. That's how Caldwell works." He said it without apology, just plain. "But there's a man up in the North Range, Cole Dawson, has a cattle operation up their mountain ranch, runs it alone. He doesn't come to town much, and he doesn't pay much attention to what town says. If you're willing to walk 4 miles north on the main road and then take the left fork another 2 miles up into the hills, you'll find his gate." Amelia looked at the mountains. "Does he hire?" she asked. "Don't know what he'd say to that," the postmaster said. "Only know he's not part of this town's way of thinking, for what that's worth." It was worth 4 miles on foot with a valise in summer heat, which was exactly what Amelia decided it was worth. She found the gate just as the sun was dropping low enough to stripe the hillside orange. It was a solid gate well built set between 2 heavy posts with the name Dawson burned into the crossbeam in letters that had gone gray with weather. Behind it the land rose steeply through stands of pine and open meadow, and she could see the rooftop of a house and the shape of a barn further up. She had barely lifted her hand to the latch when the gate swung open from the inside. Cole Dawson was not what she had expected. She didn't know what she had expected, some bent-back older man, perhaps a weathered, solitary type, who would squint at her and say nothing useful. What she got instead was a man who looked like the mountain itself had decided to take human form. 6'2" at least broad through the shoulder, with hands that said he'd spent every year of his adult life doing hard physical work. He wore his shirt rolled to the elbows, his hat pushed back, and he was looking at her with dark eyes that held exactly zero expression. He had a rifle in his left hand, not raised, not threatening, just present. "You lost," he said. "Oh," she said. He looked at her valise. He looked at the road behind her, long and empty. "You come up from Caldwell. I came in on the afternoon stage from Denver," she said. "I've spent the last several hours being turned away from every door in that town on account of a man who lied to me and then told people a different story to protect himself. I am not lost. I know exactly where I am and exactly what I need." He looked at her steadily for a moment. There was no pity in it. There was no judgment either, which surprised her more than anything else had all day. "What do you need?" he said. "Work," she said. "Honest work. I can cook. I can keep accounts. I'm good with numbers, and I don't steal, and I don't complain without reason. I don't need charity, and I don't need saving. I need a place to work and somewhere to sleep that isn't the ground." She met his eyes and held them. "I'm asking for a chance, not sympathy." Cole Dawson looked at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back from the gate. "Come on through then," he said. Hy gave her the room at the back of the house. It was small and plain, a narrow bed, a washstand, a window that looked out onto the hillside, and it was the cleanest room she had been in since she'd left Denver. She set her valise down on the floor and stood in the middle of the room and breathed. Dinner that first night was mostly silence. Cole Dawson cooked simple food, competent, the food of a man who'd been feeding himself alone for a long time, and set a plate in front of her without ceremony. She ate. He ate. The only sounds were the wind against the eaves and the distant sound of cattle somewhere below. He poured coffee without asking if she wanted it. She said thank you. He said, That was the whole of their conversation. After dinner, she asked him where she would find the account books. He looked up from his coffee. "Account books," he said. "You have a cattle operation. There are expenses and income and debts and payments. There are account books." "There are," he said slowly, "on the shelf in the front room." "I'd like to look at them tomorrow if you don't mind," she said. "I want to understand what I'm working with." He looked at her for a moment with that same flat, unreadable expression. Then he said, "Suit yourself," and went back to his coffee. The account books were a disaster. She found this out in the first hour of the following morning, sitting at the front room table with the ledgers open in front of her, and the summer light coming through the window. And the longer she read, the more certain she became that Cole Dawson had been hemorrhaging money for the better part of 3 years without fully understanding why or how. It wasn't fraud, not entirely. Some of it was simply bad bookkeeping. Entries made inconsistently. Payments recorded in the wrong column. But some of it was something else, and the further she went, the more she was certain she was seeing the marks of someone who had been systematically overcharging him, and betting that he wasn't paying close enough attention to notice. She found the name on the third ledger, Harlan Cross. Feed supplier. The same Harlan Cross who had been charging Cole Dawson 20% above standard market rate for 2 years on the basis of, as far as she could tell, absolutely nothing. No premium quality, no special arrangement, no documented reason at all. She sat very still for a moment. Then she closed the ledger and went to find Cole Dawson, who was in the barn. She could hear him before she saw him. The sound of movement, a low word spoken to a horse, and she pushed the barn door open and stepped inside, and found him working along the near wall, checking tack, his back to the door. He heard her come in and turned his head. "You're up early," he said. "I've been up for 2 hours," she said. "I need to talk to you about your accounts." He set down what he was holding and turned to face her properly. "All right," he said. "Harlan Cross has been overcharging you by 20% for 2 years, she said. "I can show you exactly where it is in the ledgers. Every transaction. I can tell you what the standard market rate should have been and what you actually paid and the difference down to the dollar." She paused. "That's not all. Your cattle numbers are recorded inconsistently. You may have a shortfall you haven't accounted for. And there are 2 entries from last spring that don't correspond to any invoice I can find, which either means the invoices were never kept or someone removed them." Cole was very quiet. "How sure are you?" he said. "Completely sure about Cross," she said. "Reasonably sure about the rest, but I'd need more time with the records to be certain." He looked at her for a long moment. "How do you know all this?" he said. "I kept books for my family's farm from the time I was 16, she said. "And then for a trading company in Denver for 4 years after that. I know what a ledger is supposed to look like, and I know what it looks like when someone's been taking advantage of a man who trusts them." Cole picked up the piece of tack he'd set down and looked at it for a moment, not seeing it. "Harlan Cross has been supplying this ranch since before my father died," he said. "I know," she said. "That's probably why he thought you wouldn't look too closely." Cole set the tack down again, deliberate, and walked past her to the barn door. "Show me," he said. He looked at everything she showed him. He sat at the table, and he went through the figures she laid out one by one, and he was quiet in a way that wasn't passive. It was the quiet of a man who was thinking hard and not wasting words on anything that wasn't a real question. He asked several real questions. She answered all of them. When he had seen everything, he sat back in the chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then he said, 3 years. 2 years at least, she said. Maybe longer. The older ledgers are harder to read. The handwriting is different. Your father's maybe. My father's, he confirmed. He looked at the open ledger in front of him. What would you do about Cross? Stop paying him immediately, she said. Find another supplier. There are at least 2 I can find in the territory, if you give me time to write some letters. Then confront him with the evidence, because if he's done this to you, he's likely done it to others in the area, and the other ranchers should know. He'll deny it, Cole said. He will, she agreed. The ledger will deny his denial. Cole was quiet again for a moment. Then he looked at her across the table and said, How long do you need to finish with the books? A week, she said. Maybe 10 days to be thorough. All right, he said. He stood up. In the meantime, the cook I had left last month. You said you could cook. I can cook, she confirmed. Breakfast before 6, he said. Supper before 7. Whatever else you need to do between those times is your business. I won't be in your way." He picked up his hat from the hook by the door. "Miss Carter," he said. She looked up. "I don't generally trust people quickly," he said. "I want you to know I'm aware of that, and I'm watching anyway." "I know," she said. "I'd do the same." He settled the hat on his head. "Figured you would," he said, and went outside. She had been at the Dawson Ranch for 5 days when the first man came up from town. He arrived in the mid-morning, riding a gray horse at a pace that suggested he was not in a hurry, but didn't want to look like he was dawdling either. Amelia was on the front porch working on the ledgers when she saw him coming up the road from the gate, and she put her pen down and waited. Cole came out of the barn. The man who rode up was perhaps 50, well-dressed for the territory, with the bearing of someone accustomed to being listened to. He pulled up, nodded to Cole, and then let his gaze move to Amelia on the porch in a way that was meant to look casual and wasn't. "Cole," the man said. "Didn't know you had company." "What can I do for you, Hendricks?" Cole said. "Just checking in," Hendricks said. "There's talk in town about a woman up here." His gaze settled on Amelia again. "That's Miss Carter," Cole said. "She works here." Hendricks looked at Amelia for a moment. Amelia looked back at him calmly. "There's some concern," Hendricks said, careful with the word, "about her background. Gerald Whitmore says she came up from Denver chasing money she wasn't owed. Says she's a type who looks for men to take advantage of." Cole didn't move. He had been standing easy, one hand on the barn door, and he didn't change his position or his expression. "Gerald Whitmore," he said, "wrote a woman letters for 2 years, sent her train fare, and then married someone else in March, and told everybody it was her mistake for reading too much into it." Hendricks blinked. "That's his version, and that's her version," he said. "I've seen the letters," Cole said. "She showed me. I can read." Hendricks looked at him for a moment. "She showed you his letters," he repeated. "She's got nothing to hide," Cole said. "You want to tell Whitmore that what he's putting around is a lie, you're welcome to. If you're here to ask me to send her away based on Gerald Whitmore's word, the answer is no." Hendricks looked back at Amelia on the porch. Amelia had picked up her pen again. "Your business," Hendricks said finally. "That's right," Cole said. "It is." Hendricks turned his horse and rode back down the way he'd come. Amelia watched until he was through the gate, and then she set her pen down and looked at Cole. He was looking at her. "He'll go back and tell them you defended me," she said. "Let him," Cole said. "It might cause you trouble." Cole walked back to the barn. At the door he stopped. "Miss Carter," he said. "Yes, you found 20% fraud in my books in one morning," he said. "I'm not going to send you away because Gerald Whitmore doesn't want you talking." He went inside the barn. Amelia sat with that for a moment. Then she picked up her pen, found her place in the column of numbers, and went back to work. On the 7th day, she found the second problem. She had worked her way through the current ledgers and into the older ones, the ones in her father's handwriting, careful and old-fashioned, and she had begun to notice a pattern in the land records that made no sense. A series of payments made to a man named Victor Harrington. Not for supplies, not for services, but listed simply as land fee. No explanation. No corresponding deed notation. She pulled out every land-related entry she could find and laid them out in order on the table. Cole came in for supper and found her surrounded by paper. He looked at the table. He looked at her. "Land records," she said before he could ask. "There's a name here I don't recognize. Victor Harrington. He's been receiving payments from this ranch for at least 6 years. They're listed as land fees. Do you know what that means?" Cole went very still. "Where did you see that name?" he said. "Here," she said, pointing. "And here and here. These go back to your father's time. The payments stopped 3 years ago. Do you know why?" He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. His expression had changed. The flat, careful look had shifted into something harder. "Victor Harrington," he said, "is a land speculator out of Billings. He spent about 10 years buying up small ranches all through this part of the territory. He got them cheap mostly by finding ways to make the owners desperate enough to sell." He looked at the entries she'd laid out. He wanted this land. My father wouldn't sell. After my father died and I took over the ranch, Harrington came to me once and offered to buy me out. I told him no. Amelia looked at the land fee entries. Then what are these payments? I don't know, Cole said. They looked at each other across the table. I think, Amelia said carefully, that we might need to find out. She found out 2 days later what the payments had been for. She had written to the Territorial Land Office at Cole's direction, asking for any recorded documentation regarding Harrington's dealings in the North Range area. The reply came back faster than she'd expected, and what it said was not reassuring. There was a pending claim. A document that Harrington had filed 4 months ago, filed and sitting quietly in the territorial records, asserting that the northern portion of the Dawson Ranch, some 400 acres of prime mountain grazing land, had been purchased from Cole Dawson's father in settlement of a debt. The document included a signature. Cole's father's signature. Cole read the letter twice and set it on the table. My father never sold that land, he said. I know, Amelia said. The land fee payments suggest your father was paying something to Harrington which doesn't match a man who'd already sold. You don't make payments on land you've already given away, which means either the record is forged or there's something here we don't understand yet. It's forged, Cole said. Flat, certain. I believe you, Amelia said. But belief isn't what wins a land claim. Evidence does. She looked at the letter. I need to write to the territory again, and I need to talk to anyone who knew your father well enough to know his handwriting. If that signature is forged, we can prove it, but it will take time, and it will take people willing to say what they know. Cole picked up his hat from the table. I need to check the north fence line, he said. I'll be back by supper. I was already at the door when she said his name. He stopped. This is what he's been waiting for, she said. The claim was filed 4 months ago, and he hasn't moved on it yet. He's waiting for something. A moment when you're weakened, maybe. When the ranch is in trouble and you'd rather sell than fight. She paused. He doesn't know about me. Cole turned halfway. No, he said. He doesn't. The look they shared was brief and said more than either of them was ready to say out loud. Then Cole put on his hat and walked out, and Amelia picked up her pen and began to write the first of many letters. On the 9th day, Harlan Cross came to the ranch himself. He arrived in the early afternoon driving a supply wagon, the same route he must have driven 100 times without incident. He pulled up in the yard and climbed down and called for Cole, and Cole came out of the barn and stood in the yard looking at him. Amelia came out of the front door and stood on the porch. Cross saw her, and his expression shifted something fast and calculating that he smoothed over quickly. Cole, he said, got your regular order. I canceled that order, Cole said. Cross frowned. I didn't receive any cancellation. I sent it last week, Cole said. You can check with the postal office in town if you like. Cole, there must be some misunderstanding, Cross started. There's no misunderstanding, Cole said. I've been looking at my accounts, carefully. I've been paying you 20% over market rate for 2 years. I don't know if you thought I wouldn't notice, or if you thought I'd just keep paying without checking, but either way, it's done. He looked at Cross steadily. I'll be going with a different supplier going forward. You can take your wagon back to town. Cross looked at Amelia on the porch. Who is that woman? He said. She works for me, Cole said. Cross looked at Amelia for a moment longer, and Amelia looked back at him without expression. She had her ledger in her hand, the one with his entries in it, and she did not make any move to hide it. Cross looked at the ledger. He looked at Cole. I've known your family for 20 years, he said. I know, Cole said. That's what I kept telling myself. Turns out that was the reason you thought you could get away with it. Cross's face went tight. You'll regret this, he said. I doubt it, Cole said. Cross climbed back up onto his wagon. He turned the horses and drove out of the yard without another word, and Amelia watched him go and thought this is the part where it starts to get harder. She was right. She told Cole that evening, sitting at the table after supper with the accounts laid out between them. Cross will go to Harrington, she said. Probably, Cole agreed. They're connected, she said. I don't have proof of that yet, but the timing of the overcharging lines up too well with the land claim filing. Someone has been trying to weaken this ranch's finances at the same time someone is preparing to claim a portion of its land. That's not a coincidence. Cole turned his coffee cup in his hands. You think Cross was feeding Harrington information? He said. I think Cross was doing more than that, she said. I think they had an arrangement. Cross keeps the money flowing out of the ranch, makes you pay more than you should, so you're always a little short, always a little more vulnerable. And when Harrington's ready to move, you're weakened enough that the offer to buy starts to look good. She paused. Or the claim goes to court, and you don't have the funds to fight it. Cole looked at the table. My father must have known something was wrong, he said quiet. Those land fee payments, they weren't in the earlier books. They started about 7 years ago. Something changed. He may have been paying Harrington to leave him alone, Amelia said. A kind of blackmail, maybe. Or a payment under a false agreement that Harrington has now decided to claim was a purchase. Cole was silent for a long time. He's been dead 3 years, he said finally. My father. He died believing this ranch was secure. It is going to be secure, Amelia said. Cole looked at her. I don't have money for a legal fight, he said. You don't need to start with money, she said. You need to start with the other ranchers. Harrington has been working this territory for years. He's done this before. The men who lost their ranches, do you know any of them? Cole thought for a moment. Some, he said. Then that's where we start, she said. He looked at her across the table. The lamp between them was burning low, and outside the summer night was full of crickets and the distant sound of the creek. You don't have to do this, he said. She picked up her pen. You opened your gate, she said, when everyone else in this county shut their door in my face. The least I can do is make sure what's behind your gate is still standing. She looked at him steadily. Let me do what I came here to do. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and pushed the nearest ledger toward her, like a man who had made a decision. All right, Miss Carter, he said. Let's get to work. The letters went out on a Monday. Amelia had written 7 of them by the time Cole came in from the north pasture that evening, his shirt dark with sweat, his expression carrying the particular weight of a man who had been thinking hard all day about things he couldn't fix with his hands. She had spread the finished letters across the table and was addressing the last envelope when he walked in, and he stopped in the doorway and looked at the row of sealed envelopes like a man looking at something he hadn't quite expected to see. 7, he said. 7 ranchers you mentioned, she said. Men who'd had dealings with Harrington over the past decade. Men who might remember something useful. She pressed the last envelope closed. I was careful about what I said. I didn't accuse anyone of anything in writing. I only asked them to share what they knew about the land transactions in this part of the territory. If Harrington intercepts one of them, there's nothing in it that can be used against us. Cole pulled out a chair and sat down. He looked at the letters. You think any of them will respond? He said. Some will, she said. People who've been wronged and never had a way to say so, they respond when someone asks the right question. She looked at him. The right question isn't, do you want to fight? It's, do you remember what happened? People remember. They remember very well. Cole picked up one of the envelopes, looked at the name on it, set it back down. Dale Morrow, he said. I haven't spoken to him in 2 years. He lost his place up on the East Ridge. Said he sold to Harrington voluntarily, but there was something about the way he said it. What way? She asked. Like a man who'd been told what story to tell, Cole said. Amelia picked up her pen and made a note on the paper beside her. Then he's the one most likely to talk. Cole watched her write. There was something in the way he watched her not quite surprise anymore, but something adjacent to it, the look of a man recalibrating something he'd believed for a long time. You've done this before, he said. Not the farming, the investigating. She didn't look up. I had a situation once in Denver, she said. A man at the trading company was moving money in ways that didn't add up. I found it. The owner didn't believe me. The man kept his job. I didn't. She finished her note. I learned from it. What did you learn? He said. Now she looked up. That being right isn't enough. You have to have witnesses. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I'll take the letters to town tomorrow morning before anyone's up. Before dawn, she agreed. Don't let Cross or anyone connected to him see you at the post office. Cole picked up his hat from the table, even though he'd only just sat down. Miss Carter, he said. She waited. I'm sorry, he said. About Denver. About whatever happened there. She looked at him for a moment. There was something in the plainness of it, no flourish, no attempt to say more than he meant, that settled somewhere in her chest with unexpected weight. Thank you, she said. He nodded once and went to bed. She sat at the table for a while longer, listening to the quiet of the ranch around her, the distant movement of cattle, the creak of the house in the evening wind, and she thought that this was the first time in longer than she could easily remember that she had felt something other than the tight-managed watchfulness she'd been carrying since Denver. Not safety exactly, not yet, but something in the direction of it. She blew out the lamp and went to bed. The first response came back in 4 days, which was faster than she'd expected, and told her something about how long Dale Morrow had been waiting for someone to ask. Cole brought the letter up from town before breakfast and set it on the table in front of her without a word. She opened it and read it while the coffee was still brewing, and by the time Cole came back inside, she had read it twice. He'll talk, she said. Cole stopped. He says Harrington's man came to him in the spring of 1883 with a document that said Dale owed a debt to a land company out of Billings. He'd never heard of the company. He'd never signed anything with them. But the document had what looked like his signature on it, and the man told him he could pay the debt, or he could lose the ranch in court, and either way, Harrington would end up with the land. She looked up. He sold. He didn't have the money to fight, and he didn't know anyone who'd believe him over a man like Harrington. Cole sat down. Same method, he said. Same method, she confirmed. Forged debt. Forged signature. The threat of a court fight that the victim can't afford. She set the letter down. He's not the only one. I'd stake money on that. This is a system, Cole. Harrington didn't develop this for your ranch. He developed it somewhere else, and he's been running it for years. Cole looked at the letter. Dale's willing to say this in front of a judge. He says he's willing, she said. Whether he holds to that when the time comes is a different matter. People are brave in letters. It's harder in person with a man like Harrington looking at them across a courtroom. I know Dale Morrow, Cole said. He's not a coward. I didn't say he was, she said. I said it's harder in person. That's not the same thing. Cole stood up and went to pour his coffee. He stood at the window for a moment. How many more do you think will write back? He said. At least 3, she said. Maybe 5. The ones who've been carrying this and haven't had anywhere to put it. She picked up her pen. I'm going to write to the Territorial Land Office again. I want to know how many properties Harrington has acquired in the last 15 years and what the recorded method of acquisition was for each one. If the pattern is there in the official records, that's something a judge can't ignore. Cole turned from the window. That kind of inquiry, he said, it's going to be noticed. Harrington has people watching. I know, she said, which means we need to move before he does. He looked at her for a moment, and she could see him weighing it, the risk on one side, the alternative on the other. Write the letter, he said. The second response came from a woman named Ruth Egan, and it changed things. Ruth's husband had been one of the men Cole had mentioned. A small rancher on the western edge of the territory who had sold to Harrington in 1881 and died 2 years later, and Ruth had been running a small boarding house in the nearest town ever since. She wrote in a tight, precise hand that reminded Amelia of her own mother, and what she wrote was this: she had kept every document from the sale. Every piece of paper. She had kept them because her husband had told her to, in the last weeks of his life, when he had told her that one day someone would want to know what Harrington had really done. She had kept them for 5 years, waiting for that day. Amelia read the letter 3 times. Then she walked out to where Cole was working on the fence line at the east edge of the ranch yard and handed it to him without a word. He read it. He read it again. She has documents, he said. She has documents. Amelia said. Original copies of the debt claim Harrington filed against her husband, the correspondence between Harrington's man and her husband. And, she pointed to the last paragraph, a statement her husband wrote before he died witnessed by their minister describing exactly how the transaction was coerced. Cole looked at her. That's a case, he said. That's the beginning of a case, she said. We still need more. Harrington's lawyers, and he will have very good lawyers, will attack every piece of evidence individually. We need enough that they can't attack all of it. We need to make the pattern so clear that even someone who's never set foot in this territory can look at it and see what he's been doing. Cole handed the letter back. Can you go to her? He said. To Ruth Egan. Can you go and get those documents in person? Amelia looked at him. That's a 2-day ride, she said. I know, he said. I'll take you. She had not been prepared for that, for the simple direct offer delivered without negotiation or condition. You don't have to do that, she said. The north pasture fence can wait 3 days, he said. Those documents can't. She thought about it for a moment. She thought about the road through the territory, the 2-day journey, the awkwardness of what it might look like, a woman traveling with a man she'd known less than 2 weeks. Cole apparently was thinking about the same thing because he said, I'll ask Mrs. Plummer from the next ranch over if she'll come along. She's a decent woman, and she's got no love for Harrington. She lost her brother-in-law's place to him in '82. Amelia looked at him. You already thought of that, she said. I thought about it last night, he said. She nodded slowly. All right, she said. Yes, let's go. Mrs. Plummer turned out to be a broad-shouldered woman of 60, with iron-gray hair and the direct manner of someone who had stopped caring about other people's opinions sometime around 1870 and had not missed them since. She arrived at the Dawson Ranch the following morning with her own horse, a saddlebag of food, and the information that she had already sent word ahead to Ruth Egan that they were coming. I know Ruth, she said by way of explanation to Amelia's surprised look. We grew up in the same county in Ohio, small world and all. She looked at Cole. You ready to move? Ready, Cole said. They rode out. The road through the territory took them down from the mountain range and across a wide valley and up again into the lower hills on the western edge. And the summer heat was relentless and honest, the kind of heat that left no room for pretense. Mrs. Plummer rode beside Amelia and talked about the territory, about the people in it, about the long, slow years of watching the land change as men like Harrington move through it. He doesn't do it all at once. Mrs. Plummer said somewhere around midday of the first day. That's what people don't understand. He doesn't come in and take. He comes in and waits. He finds out what a man owes, what a man fears, what a man doesn't want anyone else to know. And then he uses it. Slowly. The way water works on stone. She glanced at Amelia. The Dawson Ranch has been his target for a long time. Cole's father held him off because he was a stubborn man. Cole's held him off because he didn't know he was being targeted. And now he knows, Amelia said. Now he knows, Mrs. Plummer agreed. Question is whether knowing is enough. Amelia looked at the road ahead. It has to be, she said. Mrs. Plummer looked at her for a moment, then made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite agreement, but something of both. They camped the first night in the open, and after Mrs. Plummer had fallen asleep, Cole sat by the small fire and Amelia sat across from him, and they were quiet for a while, in the way that people who have been working hard together can be quiet, not uncomfortably, but fully. Cole said without looking up from the fire, Why Whitmore? She looked at him. What do you mean? She said. You're a woman who can read account books at a glance and catch fraud in 2 hours, he said. You could have had work anywhere. Denver's a city. There's work for a woman who knows numbers. Why did you trust a man who told you to come to a town you'd never been to on the promise of something you'd never seen? She was quiet for a moment. Because I was tired, she said, of doing everything alone, of being the smartest person in the room and it not mattering, of watching men with half my ability get twice my opportunities and knowing there was nothing I could say about it that anyone would listen to. She looked at the fire. He seemed kind. He wrote like a kind man. I knew the risk, and I wanted to believe the risk was worth taking." She paused. It wasn't. Cole was quiet. "He's a fool," he said, not gently, just flatly as a statement of fact. "He's a coward," she corrected. "Fools don't plan. He planned." Cole looked at her across the fire. There was something in his face that he hadn't been wearing when she'd first arrived at his gate. Not softness exactly, but an openness that hadn't been there before, a gap in the careful blankness. "You planning on going back to Denver?" he said. "After this?" "I don't know," she said. "I haven't thought past getting those documents." He nodded, looked back at the fire. "All right," he said. She looked at him for a moment longer. "What happened?" she said. 3 years ago. You said you'd trusted someone and lost everything. You don't have to tell me. But you asked me something honest, so." He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Her name was Caroline," he said. "I'd known her since we were young. When my father died and I took over the ranch, she came back. Said she'd always cared about me. Said she wanted to build something." He turned the coffee cup in his hands. What she wanted was the ranch's water rights. Her family had land to the south dryland, and the creek that runs through the north pasture was worth more to them than the cattle ever were. He paused. "She filed a claim against the water rights 6 months after we were engaged. Used letters I'd written as evidence of an agreement." He looked up. "Sound familiar?" Amelia looked at him. "Harrington," she said. Cole's jaw tightened. "Her family knew Harrington," he said. "I found that out after. Whether he put her up to it, or whether it was her idea, and he just provided the legal framework, I don't know. The claim failed because my father had the water rights properly recorded. But it cost me." He stopped. "More than money." The fire crackled. "I'm sorry," Amelia said. "I don't want sympathy," he said. "I know," she said. "I meant I understand it. Not the same situation, but the same feeling. Someone you trusted using that trust as the mechanism." She paused. "It makes you careful afterward." "Too careful," he said. "Past careful, and into something that's harder to live with." She said nothing to that, because there was nothing useful to say, and she'd learned long enough ago that the most respectful thing you could do for another person's real pain was not try to patch it with words. After a while, Cole said, "I should have seen what Cross was doing." "You trusted him," she said. "He relied on that." "I should have checked." "You were running a ranch alone," she said. "You were working the land, managing the cattle, maintaining the property alone. A man can only see so much when he's doing everything by himself." Cole looked at her. "You're defending me," he said, like he wasn't sure what to do with that. "I'm being accurate," she said. He almost smiled. She wasn't certain because the firelight was low, and he was a man who didn't give much away, but there was something at the corner of his mouth that might have been it. "Get some sleep," he said. "Long ride tomorrow." She lay down and looked at the stars through the clear summer sky and thought that she had traveled 400 miles to marry a man she didn't know and had ended up sitting by a fire in the territory with a man who hadn't said 10 words to her in her first 3 days at his ranch and was now telling her things he probably hadn't told anyone in years. Life did not move in straight lines. She had understood that intellectually for a long time. It was different to feel it working. Ruth Egan was 71 years old, and she opened her door like she'd been expecting them for 5 years because in a way she had. She brought them inside, poured coffee without asking, and set a tin box on the table between them before Amelia had even sat down. She looked at Amelia directly with eyes that had seen a great deal and stopped being gentle about it somewhere along the way. "You're the woman working at the Dawson Ranch," she said. "I am," Amelia said. "You found the ledger irregularities," Ruth said. "Yes." "My husband found irregularities too," Ruth said. "In 1881. He brought them to the county clerk, and the county clerk told him it was his own misreading and sent him home." She opened the tin box. He wasn't misreading. What was in that tin box changed the shape of everything. There were 23 documents. Amelia counted them, sorted them, read each one with the care of someone who knew exactly what she was looking at. Original debt claims, each one bearing a signature that varied slightly, too slightly, in the way of a forgery, that was good but not perfect. Correspondence between Harrington's attorney and George Egan. A handwritten statement in her husband's careful, labored hand, 3 pages long, witnessed and dated by a minister in good standing, describing with quiet precision every step of how the coercion had worked. And at the bottom of the box, one more document. A list of names, 15 of them, in Ruth's husband's handwriting with dates beside each one. Amelia looked at it. "What is this?" she said. "My husband spent the last year of his life finding every man he could who'd had the same experience," Ruth said. "He talked to people, he wrote letters, he kept that list." She looked at it. "He knew he was dying, and he knew he'd never be able to do anything with it himself. He told me to keep it for whoever came asking." Cole reached across the table slowly and turned the list so he could read it. Amelia watched him read it. She watched the moment he recognized a name. She could see it in the small tightening around his eyes. "McAllister," he said. "Thomas McAllister." "You know him," Amelia said. "He was my father's closest friend," Cole said. "He moved away from the territory in 1882. My father never understood why." He looked at the list. "He's on here. All 15 of them are reachable," Ruth said. "I've kept track. Some moved, some stayed. All of them still living." She looked at Amelia. "What are you going to do with it?" Amelia looked at the box of documents. She looked at the list. She looked at Cole. "We're going to take this to a territorial judge," she said. "Not the county clerk. Not anyone connected to Harrington's network in this part of the territory. A federal circuit judge if we can reach one. Someone Harrington hasn't already gotten to." Ruth looked at her steadily. "Harrington's been buying judges in this territory for a decade," she said. "Not all of them, but enough that you need to know which ones before you walk into a courtroom." "Do you know which ones?" Amelia asked. Ruth reached into the tin box again and pulled out one more piece of paper. "My husband was thorough," she said. They rode back to the Dawson Ranch with the tin box in Amelia's saddlebag, and something between them that had not been there on the way out. Not comfort, exactly, not ease, but the particular weight of 2 people who had shared something real and were carrying it together. Mrs. Plummer rode mostly in silence on the return trip, which was unlike her, and when Amelia glanced at her, she found the older woman watching the road ahead with an expression that was quietly satisfied in the way of someone who had helped move a stone that had been sitting too long in one place. On the last stretch of road in the late afternoon of the second day, Cole rode up beside Amelia and said quietly, so that it wouldn't carry, "When we get back, I need to go into town." She looked at him. "Cross will have gone to Harrington by now," he said. "And Harrington's going to move on the land claim. The filing has been sitting there for 4 months. He was waiting for the right moment, and I think confronting Cross gave him reason to think the moment is now." He paused. "I want to talk to the county recorder before Harrington can file any supplementary documents." "You think he'll try to alter the existing filing? I think he'll try to accelerate it," Cole said. "Get a hearing scheduled before we have time to prepare." Amelia thought about that. She thought about the documents in her saddlebag, 23 of them, plus the list, plus the map of compromised judges. "Don't go to the county recorder," she said. Cole looked at her. "Harrington will have someone watching," she said. "If you go to the county recorder, they'll know we're concerned about the land filing. Right now, the only advantage we have is that Harrington doesn't know what we've found." She held his gaze. "We need to contact the Federal Circuit Office directly. Write to them tonight. Lay out the pattern, the forged documents, the list of affected ranchers, the evidence Ruth kept. Request a federal review before Harrington's local filing can proceed." Cole was quiet for a moment. "That'll take time," he said. "Less time than a local court fight against a judge Harrington owns," she said. He looked at the road ahead. "You know what you're doing," he said. "I know what I'm doing with the papers," she said. "The rest of it," she paused, "I'm working on." Cole glanced at her. There it was again, that almost expression, the one that came close to something without quite committing. "Fair enough," he said. They rode the last mile in silence, and when the gate of the Dawson Ranch came into view over the top of the hill, Amelia felt something she hadn't expected to feel, something that was uncomfortably close to relief at the sight of it. as though it had already begun to mean something to her, as though arriving back at it was different from arriving anywhere else. She didn't examine that feeling too closely. There was too much work ahead for that. But she didn't dismiss it either.
John.
The letter to the Federal Circuit went out that night, written in Cole's hand, under Amelia's direction, with copies of 3 of Ruth's documents, enclosed enough to demonstrate the pattern, without sending everything in a single unprotected envelope. In the morning, Cole went into town. Not to the county recorder. To the post office before dawn, the same way he'd gone before. He was back before Amelia had finished with the breakfast dishes. He came in and sat down and said, "Harrington's in town." She turned from the window. "Since when?" she said. "Since yesterday, according to what I heard at the post office," he said. "He rode in with 2 men. They're staying at the hotel." He paused. "He stopped at the county recorder's office yesterday afternoon." Amelia put down the dish she was holding. "He filed something," she said. "Or asked about the timeline," Cole said. "Either way, he's moving." She sat down across from him. "Then we move faster," she said. "I need to write to Dale Morrow again. I need him to come in person, not just a letter in person. And I need to find Thomas McAllister. If we can get your father's closest friend to speak to what he saw that carries weight, no document alone can carry." "McAllister's in Wyoming," Cole said, "near Cheyenne." "Then we write to him today," she said. "And we pray he's still the man your father knew." She looked at Cole. "Is there anyone in town, anyone at all, who isn't connected to Harrington and has enough standing that people would listen to them?" Cole thought for a moment. "Reverend Caldwell," he said. "He doesn't take sides, and he doesn't owe anybody anything. And Doc Harmon. He's been here since before Harrington showed up, and he doesn't much like what he's seen." "Invite them to the ranch," Amelia said. "Not urgently, casually. Sunday dinner if that's something you'd normally do." "I don't normally do Sunday dinner," Cole said. "You do now," she said. He looked at her for a moment. "You're building something," he said. "I'm building a foundation," she said. "Harrington is going to come after you publicly. When he does, you need people in this community who know what's actually happening and who respect you enough to say so. That doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen in a courtroom. It happens at a dinner table." She looked at him steadily. "People fight harder for each other than they fight for themselves. Every rancher on Ruth's list has a reason to be angry. What they need is a reason to be brave." Cole was quiet. "And the reason is," he started. "You," she said. "The Dawson Ranch has been in this territory longer than Harrington's been in this business. Your father built something here that meant something to people. If Harrington can take this place, he can take anything." She paused. "That's the argument, not the documents. The documents are the evidence. The argument is what you stand for." Cole looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "My father used to say that land isn't what you own. It's what you're responsible for." Amelia looked at him. "Say that," she said quietly. "When the time comes, say exactly that." He looked up at her, and this time, there was nothing ambiguous about his expression. It was open and clear, and something she hadn't seen on his face before. Not quite vulnerability, but the thing adjacent to it, in a man who had spent years making sure nobody got close enough to see it. "I don't know how to do what you do," he said. "Talk to people, make them see something." "You don't have to," she said. "You just have to be honest. That's rarer than you think." She held his gaze. "And you're not doing it alone." Outside, the summer wind moved across the mountain and down through the pines, and the cattle were moving somewhere in the lower pasture, and the ranch that Harrington had been quietly circling for years sat on its hillside under a clean blue sky, not yet knowing exactly what was coming, but no longer waiting for it unprepared. Cole stood and picked up his hat. "I'll ride to Reverend Caldwell this afternoon," he said. "Good," she said. He was almost to the door when he stopped. "Miss Carter," he said. She looked up. He seemed to consider whatever he'd been about to say, and then he said a simpler version of it. "Thank you," he said, "for not running when it got complicated." She held his gaze for a moment. "Thank you," she said, "for not closing the gate. He settled his hat and walked out, and Amelia sat at the table for a moment with the tin box of documents in front of her, and the list of 15 names, and the knowledge that Harrington was in town and moving, and she thought this is the part where it either holds together or it doesn't. She pulled the nearest document toward her and picked up her pen. It was going to hold together. She was going to make sure of it. Reverend Caldwell came to dinner on Sunday and brought Doc Harmon with him, which Cole had not expected, and which told Amelia something useful about the kind of man Caldwell was, the kind who didn't come to anything alone when he thought the thing he was coming to mattered. They ate. Cole cooked, which surprised both guests, and Amelia watched him do it with the quiet efficiency of a man who had been feeding himself in solitude for long enough that he'd stopped thinking about it as a thing worth commenting on. She set the table. Nobody talked about Harrington until the plates were cleared and the coffee was poured, and then Caldwell set his cup down and said, "All right, tell me what's happening," Cole told him, plainly in the order it had happened without embellishment. Amelia added the details. He left out the documents, Ruth Egan's tin box, the list of 15 names, the forged signatures. Doc Harmon listened with the particular stillness of a man who had heard bad news delivered in many different forms, and had learned to absorb it without reaction until he understood the whole of it. When Cole finished, Caldwell was quiet for a moment. "I've been watching Harrington work this county for 8 years, he said. "I've buried 3 men whose ranches he took. 2 of them didn't die of natural causes in my estimation, though I could never prove it." He looked at Cole. "I have been waiting for someone to move against him." "We're moving," Amelia said. "But we need the community behind it. When Harrington comes after this ranch publicly, and people in this county need to have already heard the truth from someone they trust." Caldwell looked at her. "You want me to talk?" "I want you to be present," she said. "When the time comes. I want people to see that this isn't one man fighting a land speculator. It's a community deciding what kind of county it's going to be." Doc Harmon spoke for the first time. "What do you need from me?" "Your memory," she said, "and your willingness to say what you've seen." He looked at her steadily. "I've seen a great deal." "I know," she said. "So have we." Caldwell picked up his coffee cup. "When does this come to a head?" he said. "Sooner than I'd like," Amelia said. "Harrington filed something at the county recorder's office 3 days ago. We don't know exactly what yet, but he's accelerating his timeline. The federal circuit letter has gone out, but federal response takes time we may not have." "Then we make time," Caldwell said with the finality of a man who had decided something and was done deliberating. Cole looked at him across the table. Something passed between them. 2 men who had known each other a long time and were now finally talking plainly. "I should have come to you sooner," Cole said. "You didn't know what you were dealing with," Caldwell said. "You do now." The following Tuesday, Victor Harrington rode up to the Dawson Ranch gate. He didn't come alone. He brought a man who carried a leather satchel and wore the careful expression of a lawyer, and another man who stood slightly back and said nothing and had the flat, patient look of someone paid to be present rather than to speak. Cole was at the gate before they'd fully stopped. Amelia was on the porch. She stayed there. Harrington was 60, or close to it, well built in the way of a man who had never had to do physical labor and had invested the energy saved into making himself appear commanding. He had a thick silver mustache and cold, pale eyes, and he wore his clothes the way men wore authority, like he'd never once considered the possibility that someone might not recognize it. He looked at Cole the way a man looks at a property he's already decided is his. "Cole," he said, familiar, like they were old friends. "Mr. Harrington," Cole said. Harrington looked at the porch. He looked at Amelia. "I heard you had a new hand," he said. "I have," Cole said. "I'd like to speak with you privately," Harrington said. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Miss Carter," Cole said. "She manages the ranch accounts. Anything you're here about is her business." Harrington studied him for a moment. He was the kind of man who read people the way other men read maps, looking for weaknesses. Soft places, the point where the terrain would give under pressure. Cole gave him nothing to read. "Very well," Harrington said. He nodded to the lawyer, who opened the satchel and produced a document. "I believe your father entered into an agreement with my land company in 1879. This document records the transfer of 400 acres of your north pasture in settlement of a debt he owed. The transfer was never properly recorded with the county, which was an oversight on our part, and I'm here to rectify that." Cole did not look at the document. "My father didn't sell that land," he said. "He signed this document," Harrington said. "May I?" Amelia said from the porch. Both men looked at her. Harrington's expression was smooth. He was too practiced to show irritation, but something behind his eyes shifted. "By all means," he said. She came down from the porch and took the document from the lawyer. She read it carefully. She took her time. Harrington watched her with the calm of a man who was not concerned about what she might find, and that calm told her something important. He was confident. Whatever was in this document, he believed it was airtight. Or he needed them to believe he believed that. She handed it back. "The signature doesn't match your other documents," she said to Cole. The lawyer started to speak. Harrington raised one hand slightly, and the lawyer stopped. "I'm sorry," Harrington said. "I've spent the last 2 weeks working through the Dawson Ranch records," Amelia said. "I have 17 years of documents in Mr. Cole Dawson's father's handwriting. The signature on that document is a close imitation of his hand, but it's not his. The pressure of the pen is different. The loop on the D in Dawson is different. The date notation format is different. He always wrote the month out in full. That notation uses numerals." Harrington looked at her. "And who are you exactly?" he said. "She told you," Cole said. "She manages the ranch accounts." "A ranch hand's opinion of a signature is not a legal determination," Harrington said. "No," Amelia agreed. "A handwriting expert's is, though. We've requested one." That was not entirely true yet, but the way Harrington's eyes moved just slightly, just for a fraction of a second, told her it landed. "This matter," Harrington said, turning back to Cole, with the deliberate ease of a man changing the direction of a current, "doesn't need to become complicated. You're a single man running a difficult operation. The north pasture alone costs you in fencing and labor that your current cattle numbers don't justify. I'm prepared to make you a fair offer for the remaining acreage, the parts not covered by the existing agreement. You'd walk away with enough to rebuild somewhere smaller and easier." Cole looked at him. "No," he said. Harrington waited as though he expected more. Cole didn't give him more. "Think carefully," Harrington said. "I've found that men who don't settle these things early find them significantly harder to settle later." "Is that a threat?" Cole said. "It's an observation," Harrington said pleasantly. "I've thought carefully," Cole said. "The answer is no. The land claim is fraudulent, and we'll say so in court. Good day, Mr. Harrington." Harrington looked at him for a long moment. He looked at Amelia. His expression never wavered into anything overt. He was too careful for that, but something in him had recalibrated, and Amelia could feel it the way you felt a change in the air before a storm. "Good day, then," he said, and rode back down the hill. The lawyer and the silent man followed him. Cole didn't move until they were through the gate. Then he said quietly, "He wasn't expecting that." "No," Amelia said. "He was expecting a man alone." She watched the riders disappear down the road and thought, now it starts in earnest. She was right faster than she'd anticipated. By Thursday, the story in town had changed. Cole found out from Reverend Caldwell, who rode up to the ranch that afternoon with his hat pulled low, and the expression of a man delivering unpleasant news he hadn't had time to soften. "Harrington's been talking," Caldwell said, sitting down at the kitchen table with his coffee untouched. "He's telling people that the woman you've taken on is the one who wrote those letters to the other ranchers. He's saying she's a professional agitator, someone who goes from county to county, stirring up legal trouble for pay. He's saying she manipulated you." Amelia sat very still. Cole said, "That's a lie." "I know it's a lie," Caldwell said. "But it's a well-constructed one. It takes the attention off Harrington and puts it on her. It makes you look like a man who was deceived rather than a man building a case. And he paused. "It gives people who were already uncomfortable about a woman staying at a bachelor ranch something to say out loud." Cole's jaw tightened. "What are people saying?" Amelia asked. Caldwell looked at her directly. He was not the kind of man to soften a thing past usefulness. Some are saying you're after the ranch, that your arrangement with Cole is personal and calculated. Gerald Whitmore has been in the saloon telling anyone who'll listen that you came to Caldwell to find a vulnerable man after he rejected you. The room was very quiet. Amelia looked at the table. She understood with the cold clarity of someone who had been through a version of this before exactly what was happening. Harrington had seen the threat. He couldn't attack the documents directly, not yet, so he was attacking her. If her credibility was gone, everything she'd built was gone with it. The letters to the other ranchers, the case she'd assembled, the community Caldwell was quietly building. All of it rested to some degree on people being willing to believe that what she'd found was real. She looked up. "How bad is it?" she said. "Bad enough that 2 of the men you wrote to have gone quiet," Caldwell said. "I don't know yet if they'll hold." He paused. "Dale Morrow is still with you. He wrote to me directly. Said he didn't care what they were saying about you because he knew what Harrington had done to him." Cole stood up from the table. "I'm going to town," he said. "Cole," Amelia started. "I'm going to town," he said again. Not heated, flat and final. Caldwell looked at him. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to talk to people," Cole said. He looked at Amelia. "Not fight, talk." A pause. "I know how to do that. I just usually choose not to." He took his hat and walked out. Caldwell watched him go. Then he looked at Amelia. "He's a good man," Caldwell said. "I know," she said. "You built something here in 2 weeks that I've been trying to build for years," Caldwell said. "Don't let Harrington take that from you." She looked at the tin box on the shelf. 23 documents. A list of 15 names. A map of compromised judges. "He won't," she said. Cole came back from town 3 hours later, and he did not look like a man who had lost a fight. He sat down, poured himself coffee, and said, "Gerald Whitmore is a harder problem than Harrington." Amelia looked at him. "What happened?" "I talked to 6 men," Cole said. 4 of them listened. 2 of them, Hendricks and a man named Burwell, are too deep in Harrington's pocket to hear anything. But 4 is enough for now. He set his coffee down. "Whitmore is going around saying things, and the things he's saying aren't going to stop because I asked him to. He needs a reason to be quiet." "We can't threaten him," Amelia said. "No," Cole agreed. "But we can make it costly for him to keep talking." He looked at her. "You said once that you had his letters, the ones he wrote from Denver." She looked at him carefully. "I do," she said. "Does anything in those letters constitute a written agreement? A promise of employment? A contractual arrangement? Anything he could be held to legally?" She thought about it. She had read those letters so many times she could have recited them in her sleep. She thought about the specific language, the careful, calculated language of a man who knew what he was doing and thought he'd been clever enough not to leave proof. And then she remembered a paragraph from the 5th letter. A paragraph she had not thought about in the context of a legal argument because she had been too angry to think about it analytically. "He offered me a position," she said slowly. "In writing. He called it a business arrangement, but the language he used, the specific terms, included a housing guarantee and a salary figure. He laid it out in specifics." She looked at Cole. "If a court determined that constituted a contract, he'd be liable for breach." Cole looked at her. "Would a court determine that?" he said. "With the right argument," she said, "and the right judge, yes." "Then we send him a letter," Cole said. "Not threatening, informational. We let him know that you are aware of the contractual nature of his written offer, and that you are in a position to pursue a breach of contract claim if his public statements continue." He paused. "Men like Whitmore aren't brave. They're only dangerous when there's no cost to it." Amelia looked at him for a moment. "When did you become a strategist?" she said. Something crossed his face that was closer to a real smile than anything she'd seen from him. "I've been listening," he said. She drafted the letter to Whitmore that night. She was careful with every word. Not a threat, not an accusation, simply an accounting of facts and a gentle indication that certain facts might need to be aired publicly if his statements did not cease. She read it aloud to Cole before she sealed it, and he listened with his arms crossed and his expression thoughtful. "Good," he said when she finished. "Send it." She sent it. The response from the Federal Circuit arrived on a Friday morning, and it was not what she'd hoped for. Cole brought it up from the post office and set it on the table, and Amelia opened it and read it, and set it back down, and was quiet for a moment. "What does it say?" Cole said. "They've received our letter," she said. "They're taking it under advisement. The circuit judge will be in the territory in approximately 6 weeks." She looked up. 6 weeks. Cole's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. "Harrington won't wait 6 weeks, he said. "No," she said. "He won't." "He'll push the local filing through before then," Cole said. "Get a county hearing scheduled. Get a judge he owns to rule on the land claim before the federal court can weigh in." "Yes," she said. "Then what do we do?" he said. She stood up and walked to the shelf where the tin box was kept. She opened it and took out Ruth's documents, the list, the map. She spread them on the table and looked at them. "We go to the county hearing," she said, "on our own terms. We file a formal objection to the land claim before Harrington can schedule it, which forces him to respond to us rather than the other way around. We file it with affidavits from Dale Morrow and everyone else willing to sign. We present enough of a counter-argument that even a compromised judge has to think twice before ruling against us in front of witnesses." "What kind of witnesses?" Cole said. "Caldwell," she said. "Doc Harmon, Mrs. Plummer. Everyone who knows what's happened in this county and is willing to stand in a room and be seen standing there." She looked at him. "Harrington has been running this scheme in the dark for 15 years. The one thing he can't survive is light." Cole sat down across from her. "If the judge is compromised," he started. "If the judge rules against us," she said. "The Federal Circuit still has our filing. An unjust local ruling against documented evidence of fraud gives the federal court reason to intervene faster. Either way, Harrington loses his quiet." She paused. "He's built his whole operation on nobody making noise. We're going to make a great deal of noise." Cole was quiet for a long time. "You understand," he said, "that if we do this, he'll come after you specifically, not just with stories. He'll find something real, or he'll make something up, and it won't matter which, because by the time it's in front of a judge, it'll look the same." "I know," she said. "You're not from this county," he said. "You have no history here, no family, no one who knew you before you walked through my gate. He can say anything about you, and the only person who can contradict it is me." "I know," she said again. "That doesn't frighten you," he said. Not a question. She looked at these documents on the table. "What frightens me," she said, "is losing. Not for me. For Dale Morrow and Ruth Egan and Thomas McAllister and every name on that list and every rancher who came after them." She looked up. "I didn't walk through your gate to be safe, Cole. I walked through it because I had nowhere else to go. That changed about a week in." He looked at her across the table. The moment lasted longer than either of them expected. Then Cole said, "I need to tell you something." She waited. "Thomas McAllister wrote back," he said. He reached into his coat and put a letter on the table. "It came yesterday. I didn't tell you because I needed to think about it first." She looked at the letter. She looked at him. "What does it say?" she said. "He's willing to come," Cole said. "He's willing to testify to everything he saw in 1882, but he also said something else." He put his hand flat on the letter. "He said Harrington didn't just forge my father's signature on that land document. He said my father knew about it, and he didn't fight it because Harrington had something on him." The room was very still. "What did he have?" Amelia said. Cole's expression was carefully controlled, but she could see the effort it took. "McAllister doesn't say in the letter," Cole said. "He says he'll tell me in person, but he gives enough that I understand it was something my father did before I was born. Something Harrington found out about and used to keep him from ever going to the law." Amelia looked at him. "Cole," she said. "It doesn't change anything," he said, firm. He'd already worked through that part. "My father was a man, not a legend. Men make mistakes. Harrington using a mistake against him is still blackmail. The land claim is still forged. The pattern is still real." He paused. "But I needed you to know because if Harrington finds out McAllister is coming, he may use it. Whatever it is about my father, he may put it in front of a judge to discredit the testimony." Amelia thought about this. "Then we get ahead of it," she said. He looked at her. "We acknowledge it ourselves," she said. "In our filing. Not the specifics, McAllister will share those in person, and we decide then what to do with them. But we acknowledge that Harrington used coercive information against your father as part of the same pattern he's used against every other rancher on that list. We make it part of the case against him rather than letting him make it a case against your father." She held his gaze. "It's harder, but it takes the weapon out of his hand." Cole was silent for a long moment. "It means people knowing my father wasn't—" He stopped. "Your father held this ranch for 30 years, she said quietly. "He held it against a man who was willing to do anything to take it. Whatever mistake he made, he paid for it every year in those land fee payments, and still he didn't sell. Still he left this land to you." She paused. "That's the man people know. Let's make sure that's the man they remember." Cole looked at her for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower than usual. "I don't know how you do that," he said. "Do what," she said. "Make the thing that's hardest sound like the thing that's right." She looked at him. "Usually they're the same thing," she said. He picked up the letter from McAllister and looked at it. "Write to him," he said. "Tell him to come as soon as he can." "I'll write it tonight," she said. He nodded. He was still looking at the letter. "Amelia," he said. It was the first time he had used her given name. Not Miss Carter. Her name. She felt it land somewhere it hadn't been before. "Yes," she said. He looked up. "Whatever happens in that courtroom," he said. "Whatever Harrington does, I need you to know that I don't regret opening that gate." She held his gaze. "Neither do I," she said. Outside, the summer evening was settling over the mountain, and somewhere in the lower pasture the cattle were moving toward water, and the ranch that had been built by a flawed and stubborn and ultimately brave man was still standing on its hillside, still holding the land. It had always held, waiting now for what was coming, with something that felt against all reason like readiness. Inside, Amelia Carter picked up her pen. She had letters to write, and Harrington had no idea how many. Chate. The notice arrived the following Monday. A county hearing on the Dawson land claim had been scheduled for 22 days hence. The presiding judge was a man named Arthur Reeves. Caldwell came to the ranch within an hour of the notice reaching town. He didn't knock. He walked in and set a piece of paper on the table beside Amelia's letters and said, "Reeves." Amelia looked at the name. She looked at the map of compromised judges. Arthur Reeves was on the map. She looked up at Caldwell. "How bad?" she said. "He's ruled for Harrington in 3 prior land disputes," Caldwell said. "Never a case this visible, never with this much documentation on the other side. But he's Harrington's man." Cole stood at the window with his back to the room. "Then we make it so visible," he said without turning, "that ruling against us costs him more than ruling for Harrington." He turned. His expression was the clearest, steadiest thing in the room. 22 days, he said. "Let's use every one of them." Amelia looked at the table covered in documents and letters and notes, and the careful architecture of everything they'd built, and she thought 22 days. She had built cases from less. She picked up her pen. 22 days was not enough time, and they used every hour of it anyway. Amelia divided the work, the way she divided a ledger by category, by priority, by what could be done and what could not. The affidavits came first. Dale Morrow rode in from the East Ridge on the 3rd day and sat at the kitchen table and told his story to Amelia's pen in a voice that was steady and deliberate and had the particular quality of a man who had been waiting to say something true for a very long time. She wrote it exactly as he told it. Every detail, every date, the name of Harrington's man, the document he'd been shown. The way it had been presented not as a choice, but as a conclusion already reached. When he finished, he looked at what she'd written. "That's it," he said. "That's exactly it." "Sign it," she said. "Right there." He signed. 2 days later, a woman named Agnes Foley arrived. She had not been on Ruth's list. She had heard through a chain of neighbors and church acquaintances that something was happening at the Dawson Ranch, and she had ridden 40 miles alone to be part of it. Her husband had lost his homestead claim in 1880. She had kept nothing. No documents, no letters, but she had her memory, and her memory was precise and clear and angry, in the quiet, enduring way of a woman who had carried something unjust for 6 years and had not once been given permission to set it down. Amelia took her statement. She had Cole witness it along with Caldwell, which gave it the strongest possible standing under territorial rules of evidence. "Thank you for coming," Amelia told her when it was done. Agnes Foley looked at her. "Thank you for asking," she said. "Nobody ever asked before." By the end of the first week, they had 6 signed affidavits. By the end of the second, 9. Each one documented a separate instance of the same pattern: forged debt-coerced sale, a signature that wasn't right, a threat that was never made explicit enough to be called a threat by anyone who hadn't lived through it. Thomas McAllister arrived on the 14th day. He was older than Cole had expected, 70. At least his hair gone white, his hands stiff with age, but his mind was precise, and his eyes were clear, and he embraced Cole at the gate with the straightforward emotion of a man who had not allowed himself to feel something for a long time, and had decided today was the day he would. "You look like your father," he said. "So I'm told," Cole said. McAllister looked at him for a moment longer than the words required. "I owe you something," he said. "I should have told you years ago." "You're here now," Cole said. "Come inside." McAllister sat at the kitchen table, and he told Cole what he had never told anyone. In 1879, James Dawson, Cole's father, had been involved in a cattle transaction that was, in the polite language McAllister used, irregular. Not theft, not fraud exactly, but a deal made in desperation during a hard year that involved cattle whose ownership was not as clear as it should have been. Harrington had found out. Harrington had evidence, or claimed to, which amounted to the same thing, and he had gone to James Dawson privately and told him that the land fee payments were the price of his silence. James Dawson had paid. He had paid for 7 years rather than see his name dragged through court, rather than see what it would do to his son. A boy, then young, building himself against his father's example. He had died without ever telling Cole because he thought the secret dying with him was a mercy. Harrington had apparently thought differently. The room was very quiet when McAllister finished. Cole sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at them. Amelia did not speak. She had learned when to speak, and this was not that moment. After a while, Cole said, "He paid for 7 years." "Yes," McAllister said, "and still didn't sell." "He would never have sold," McAllister said. "He told me once, he said that land wasn't his to sell, that it belonged to whoever came after him." He paused. "He meant you." Cole was quiet again. Then he said, "Did he do wrong the cattle transaction?" McAllister considered it honestly. "He did something he shouldn't have. In a year when the alternative was losing the ranch, he made a choice that a better year might not have required." He looked at Cole. He spent the rest of his life paying for it, and the payment nearly broke him, and he still held the land. He paused. "I've known worse men who never made a mistake in their lives because they never had the courage to try." Cole looked at Amelia. "You said we get ahead of it," he said. "Yes," she said. "How?" She had been thinking about this for 2 weeks. She had drafted and discarded 4 versions of how to present it. Now, she said, "We include it in our own filing. A single paragraph plainly written. We state that Harrington obtained leverage against your father through the threat of legal action regarding a historical transaction and used that leverage to extract payments falsely recorded as land fees, and that this coercive arrangement is part of the same pattern documented in the 9 affidavits. We name it for what it is: blackmail." She looked at him steadily. "If we name it, Harrington can't spring it as a surprise. If we name it plainly in our own words, in our own filing, it becomes evidence of his method rather than evidence against your father." McAllister looked at her. "She's right," he said. "I've seen enough courtrooms to know that the side that controls the story controls the room." Cole looked at the table. "It means people knowing," he said. "About my father." "Some people," Amelia said. "The people in that courtroom, who will also know in the same breath that Harrington is a blackmailer. Your father's mistake was human. Harrington's use of it was predatory. She paused. That's the distinction. We make sure no one can miss it. Cole sat with it. Outside the window. The summer wind was working through the pines, and somewhere down the hill, one of the horses was moving in the pasture, and the ranch was the same ranch it had been every day of Cole's life. Solid, demanding, indifferent to the complexity of the people on it. All right, Cole said. Write it. Amelia rewrote the filing that night. All of it. She restructured the argument from the ground up with McAllister's testimony as the cornerstone, not because it was the most dramatic piece of evidence, but because it demonstrated that Harrington's method had not changed in 15 years. The same leverage, the same forged documents, the same quiet, patient pressure applied to men who had no one to help them see what was happening until it was too late. She worked until the lamp ran low. Cole came in at some point past midnight and refilled it without being asked, and set a cup of coffee beside her hand, and went back to bed. And she thought that she had been in this kitchen long enough now that they had developed a language of small gestures: the lamp, the coffee. The chair pushed out slightly in wordless invitation that said more than either of them had yet found occasion to say directly. She finished before dawn. She read it back to herself in the thin early light and thought, "This is the best thing I have ever written." Then she made breakfast and waited for Cole. He came in at 5:30, read the filing standing at the counter with his coffee, did not speak for a very long time. "This is going to make him come after you hard," he said. "I know," she said. "Are you ready for that?" She looked at him. "I've been managing people coming after me since Denver," she said. "The difference now is that I have something worth defending." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, once folded the filing carefully, and put it in the inside pocket of his coat. "I'll file it this morning," he said, "before Harrington's people are awake." He was out the door by 5:45. Harrington's response came within 36 hours, and it was exactly what Amelia had predicted, and worse. He filed a counter-document that attacked the affidavits individually, citing Dale Morrow's distance from the original transaction, questioning Agnes Foley's memory, disputing the chain of custody on Ruth Egan's documents. That was expected. What was not expected was the second document attached to it. Cole brought it home and set it on the table and said flatly, "He found someone." She picked it up. It was a sworn statement from a man in Denver, a former clerk at the trading company where Amelia had worked 4 years ago. The statement said that Amelia Carter had been dismissed from her position for falsifying account records. It said she had a history of manipulating financial documents to suit her own purposes. It said she had done this before and was doing it again. It was a lie. A complete, deliberate, expertly constructed lie. And it was signed and witnessed and filed as legal testimony. Amelia set the document down. She was quiet for a moment that was not quite long enough to be called long. Then she said, "What's the clerk's name?" "Edmund Farr," Cole said. She looked up at him. "Edmund Farr left that company under suspicion of embezzlement in 1883, she said. "He was never charged because the owner didn't want the publicity. I know because I was the one who found the discrepancy in his work." She paused. "He knew I'd found it. He knew I'd told the owner. And then the owner dismissed me rather than pursue it because it was easier." Cole stared at her. "Harrington found the one man in Denver who had a reason to lie about you," he said. "Harrington is thorough," she said. There was a steadiness in her voice that surprised even her. "He had someone researching my history the moment he saw me on that porch. He's been building this for weeks." "Can you prove Farr is lying?" Cole said. "I can get the owner of the trading company to confirm that Farr left under suspicion," she said. "Whether he'll do it in writing, whether he'll risk the publicity he avoided, then I don't know." She looked at the document. "I need to write to him today." "Today," Cole agreed. "Cole." She stopped, looked at him. "If the owner won't confirm it, this could damage everything. Harrington knows that. He filed this specifically to give Judge Reeves a reason to discount my work on the affidavits." Cole looked at her steadily. "Write to the owner," he said, "and then keep working. Because even if he won't confirm it, we have 9 affidavits. McAllister's testimony, 23 documents from Ruth Egan, and a pattern of fraud that goes back 15 years. Harrington can attack your reputation. He can't make all of that disappear. She looked at him. You sound like me, she said. I've been listening, he said, again. The same thing he'd said weeks ago, and she felt it the same way she'd felt it then, as something quiet and real, settling into the space between them. She picked up her pen. The letter to the trading company owner went out that afternoon. 4 days before the hearing, Whitmore went quiet. Not voluntarily. He had received Amelia's letter about the contractual nature of his written offer, and sat on it for 2 weeks, apparently believing she wouldn't act on it, and then someone Caldwell suspected it was his wife who had more sense than he did, had persuaded him to consult an attorney. The attorney had read the letters and told him plainly that there was a case. Whitmore stopped talking. It was not a complete victory. The damage he'd done to Amelia's reputation in town was not undone by his silence. But the active campaign of slander stopped, and in the absence of his voice, other voices had more room. Mrs. Plummer was one of them. She had been quietly talking to people for weeks, in the way that women in small communities talked at the store after church at the well. Not arguing, not accusing, just telling what she knew and letting people do their own arithmetic. She had a particular talent for this, the gift of being believed by people who would have dismissed the same information from a man because she was one of them and had been for 40 years and had never once been known to exaggerate. By the time the hearing was 3 days out, the population of Caldwell had divided itself in the way that populations divided when something real was at stake, not evenly, not cleanly, but definitively. The people who were with Harrington were with him, and the people who weren't were finding their way to each other. It wasn't a majority. It didn't need to be. It needed to be visible. The response from the Denver Trading Company owner arrived 2 days before the hearing. Cole brought it in and set it on the table, and Amelia's hands were steady when she opened it, though her heart was not. She read it. She read it again. He confirmed it, she said. Cole sat down. Edmund Farr left under suspicion of embezzlement, she said. He's put it in writing. He won't testify in person. He makes that clear, but he's provided a sworn affidavit confirming that Amelia Carter was dismissed from her position not for misconduct, but because her discovery of Farr's embezzlement created a situation the company found commercially inconvenient. She looked up. He used that exact phrase, commercially inconvenient. Cole looked at the letter. He's ashamed, he said. That's what commercially inconvenient means. Yes, she said, but ashamed enough to write it down, which is what matters. She pressed her hand flat on the letter. This dismantles Harrington's filing against me. Farr is a discredited witness. His statement is worthless. Cole leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Day after tomorrow, he said. Day after tomorrow, she confirmed. He looked at her. How are you? He said. It was such a simple question asked so directly that for a moment she didn't know what to do with it. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Ask me after. He nodded. Then he said, whatever happens in that room, I want you to know something. She waited. When you walked through my gate, he said. This ranch was something I was holding on to out of habit, because my father built it and leaving felt like losing. I wasn't building anything. I was just maintaining. He paused. You changed that. She looked at him. I looked at your books, she said. That's all. No, he said. That's not all, and you know it. She did know it. She had known it for some time in the quiet accumulating way that you knew things you weren't ready to say, in the way he refilled her lamp without being asked, in the way she had started listening for the sound of his boots on the porch in the evening, in the way the ranch had started to feel against all practical logic, like somewhere she was supposed to be. Cole, she said. You don't have to say anything, he said. I'm not asking you for anything. I just wanted you to know. She looked at him for a long moment. I know, she said. And I'm not going anywhere. Not before the hearing, and not after it. She held his gaze. We finish what we started. He nodded. Something in him settled visibly the way a man settles when he's been braced for something and found it wasn't as hard as he'd feared. Then let's go over the filing one more time, he said. She reached for the papers. They worked until midnight. The morning of the hearing. Thomas McAllister was at the kitchen table before anyone else. He had his statement in his hand, and he was reading it over with the careful attention of a man who intended to say exactly what he'd written and nothing less. Dale Morrow arrived at 7. Agnes Foley at 7:30. By 8 o'clock, there were 11 people in and around the Dawson ranch yard, ranchers' witnesses, people who had driven or ridden hours to be present, and Cole stood at the edge of the porch and looked at them and did not speak for a moment. Amelia stood beside him. "Your father held this land for 30 years, she said quietly. He didn't do it alone. He just didn't know how to ask." Cole looked at the people in his yard. "Neither did I," he said. "You asked," she said. "You opened the gate." He looked at her. Then he put on his hat and walked down the steps. "All right," he said to the assembled people in the voice of a man who had decided something. "Let's go." They rode into Caldwell together. 11 people, a tin box of documents, and the weight of 15 years of wrongs that had never been answered. The main street was already crowded. Word had traveled the way word always traveled in small communities, and people had come to see what would happen. Some of them were Harrington's. Amelia could tell by the careful way they positioned themselves separate from the crowd watching. But most of them were simply people who had been waiting to find out what kind of county they lived in. Harrington was already at the courthouse. He stood outside it with his lawyer and his silent man and 3 others. Amelia didn't recognize, and he watched the group approaching with the expression of a man recalculating something he had thought was settled. He looked at Cole. He looked at the people with Cole. He looked at Amelia. His expression did not change, but his lawyer leaned toward him and said something, and Harrington's jaw moved slightly in a way that told Amelia he was not pleased. Good, she thought. She carried the tin box into the courthouse herself. Judge Reeves was already seated when they filed in a narrow man with a face built for skepticism, and he looked at the room filling up around him with the expression of a man who had expected a routine hearing, and was revising that expectation rapidly. The benches filled. People stood at the back. Caldwell took a seat in the front row and folded his hands and looked at the judge with the patient, clear-eyed attention of a man of God who was also keeping very careful score. Harrington's lawyer spoke first. He was good, fluid, and confident, the kind of voice that was paid to make things sound inevitable. He laid out the land claim. He referenced the signed document. He referred to Amelia's history in Denver in a single smooth sentence that he clearly expected to land heavily. Judge Reeves looked at the document. He looked at Cole. "Mr. Dawson," he said, "you contest this claim." Cole stood. "I do," he said. "On what basis?" the judge said. Cole looked at him steadily. "On the basis that my father never signed that document," he said. "On the basis that Victor Harrington has used the same forged document method against 15 other ranchers in this territory over the past 15 years, all of whom I have affidavits from. On the basis that Harrington blackmailed my father with information he had no right to use and collected payments under false pretenses that he is now reframing as a land purchase. And on the basis that the man he brought in from Denver to discredit the woman who uncovered all of this was himself dismissed from his position under suspicion of embezzlement." He paused. "I have documentation for every one of those statements." The room was very quiet. Reeves looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Harrington. Harrington was looking at the room, at Caldwell in the front row, at Doc Harmon beside him, at the 11 people who had ridden in from the Dawson Ranch, at the crowd standing at the back of the room. And Amelia saw it happen the exact moment when Victor Harrington understood that the arithmetic had changed. He had run this operation in the dark for 15 years. He had chosen his targets carefully, men, alone men, without resources. Men who had no one to stand beside them. He had never once faced a room full of people who knew what he'd done and had come to say so publicly. He looked at Amelia. She looked back at him. She held a tin box on her lap that contained 23 documents, 9 affidavits, and a list of 15 names. She had a letter from Denver dismantling his witness. She had McAllister sitting 2 seats to her right, ready to stand and speak. She had Caldwell and Harmon and Morrow and Foley, and 8 others who had come on their own accord because they had decided something about what kind of people they were going to be. Harrington looked at his lawyer. His lawyer looked at the judge. Judge Reeves looked at the room one more time, and what he saw in the room told him something about what ruling against the evidence in front of a crowd this size would cost him, and Amelia watched him do that calculation, and she watched him arrive at a conclusion. "I'll need to review the documentation before proceeding," Reeves said. "This hearing is continued for 1 week pending review. All submitted affidavits and evidence will be entered into the record." He brought down his gavel. The room exhaled. Harrington stood and walked out without looking at anyone, his lawyer moving quickly to keep pace. The silent man followed. The courthouse door swung closed behind them. The room immediately filled with sound. Not celebration, not yet, but the sound of people who had been holding their breath, letting it go. Dale Morrow grabbed Cole's hand. Agnes Foley was crying quietly, not sadly, but with the specific relief of someone setting down a weight they'd been carrying for years. McAllister put a hand on Cole's shoulder. Amelia sat with the tin box on her lap and let the room move around her for a moment. Cole turned and looked at her through the crowd. She looked back at him. He moved through the people between them, and when he reached her, he said simply and quietly, "You did that." "We did that," she said. "Amelia." He said her name the same way he'd said it at the kitchen table, like it had weight, like it was something he'd been thinking about. "1 week," she said. "It's not over." "I know," he said. "But it's different than it was this morning." She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "It is." Outside, Caldwell was talking to people on the courthouse steps, and Mrs. Plummer had found someone she knew and was clasping both their hands, and the street of Caldwell, Montana, was full of noise and motion, and the complicated necessary business of a community deciding what it was going to be. The tin box was still in Amelia's hands. There was still a week to go, but standing in the doorway of that courthouse with Cole Dawson beside her, and the summer light falling hard and clean across everything, she thought that some things were already decided not by a judge, not by a document, but by 11 people who had ridden into town together on a summer morning and refused to do it alone. The week that followed the hearing was the quietest and the most dangerous week of all. Harrington did not disappear. Men like Harrington never disappeared after a single setback. They regrouped, and they came back with something sharper than what they'd used before. Amelia knew this the way she knew the shape of a fraudulent ledger entry, not because someone had told her, but because she had lived long enough to understand how men who had never been stopped behaved when they were stopped for the first time. She told Cole on the ride back from the courthouse, while the others were still talking, and the moment was still warm with what felt like victory, but wasn't finished yet. "He's going to do something this week," she said, "before the review, something that changes the terms." Cole kept his eyes on the road. "What kind of something?" "I don't know yet," she said. "That's what concerns me." Cole was quiet for a moment. "Then we watch." "We watch," she agreed. They watched. And on the third day, Harrington did exactly what she had feared, and it was worse than she'd imagined. It came through Caldwell. The way most of the real information came quietly in the early morning, with Caldwell's horse tied at the gate, before Cole had finished his first cup of coffee. Caldwell came inside and sat down, and did not touch the coffee Amelia poured him, which told her immediately that whatever he was carrying was heavy. "He found another witness," Caldwell said. Cole set his cup down. "From Denver," Amelia said. "No," Caldwell said. He looked at her directly. "From here. A woman named Ida Marsh. She works at the hotel. She's given a statement to Harrington's lawyer saying that she overheard a conversation between you and Cole 2 weeks ago, in which you told him that you intended to claim a portion of the ranch as compensation for your work on the legal case." He paused. "The statement says you told him that if he didn't agree, you'd take the documents you'd assembled and use them to damage his reputation instead of Harrington's." The room was absolutely still. Amelia looked at Caldwell. She could feel Cole looking at her, and she did not look away from Caldwell because she needed to think clearly, and looking at Cole right now would make that harder. "I have never spoken to a woman named Ida Marsh," she said. I've never been inside that hotel. I've been inside this ranch and Ruth Egan's house and the courthouse and nowhere else in this county." "I know that," Caldwell said. "It's fabricated," she said. "Completely. He needed a local witness because the Denver witness failed and he found someone willing to say what he needed said." "I know that too," Caldwell said. "The problem is what it does in the courtroom." Cole said, "What does it do?" Caldwell looked at him. "It gives Reeves something. If the judge is looking for a reason to rule against you, and he has reason to want to, because Harrington still has things on Reeves that we haven't been able to document. This gives him a narrative. It reframes Amelia as someone who came to this ranch with an ulterior motive. It makes everything she assembled look like it was built in her own interest rather than in yours." Cole looked at Amelia. She could see him doing what she was doing, running through it, turning it over, looking for the way through. "Can we discredit Ida Marsh?" he said to Amelia. "We can try," she said. "But she's a local woman and I'm a stranger, and the jury for that argument is public opinion, which Harrington has been working for weeks." She thought for a moment. "There's something else we can do." "What?" Cole said. "We can make the statement irrelevant," she said. "If we can get the Federal Circuit Court to formally open a review before Reeves delivers his ruling, then Reeves can't rule. A federal review supersedes a local hearing. Harrington's local maneuvering becomes moot." Caldwell looked at her. The federal response said 6 weeks. The federal response said the circuit judge would be in the territory in approximately 6 weeks, she said. That was over 2 weeks ago, which means he may already be closer than that. She looked at Cole. "I need to send another letter to the Federal Circuit office today. Not a request. A filing. I need to formally submit everything we have, every affidavit, every document. The Denver confirmation, all of it, as a federal complaint against a pattern of land fraud. That's different from the inquiry letter we sent. That's an official submission that forces them to act." Cole said, "Can you do that without a lawyer? Citizens have the right to file federal complaints," she said. "I know the correct form because I helped my employer file one in Denver in 1882. It was rejected, but I know the process." She looked at him steadily. "The submission has to be perfect. Every page numbered. Every document referenced correctly. The argument has to be clear enough that a federal clerk who knows nothing about this county understands what he's reading in the first 2 pages. "How long?" Cole said. "I can have it ready by tomorrow morning if I work through the night," she said. Cole looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Caldwell. "Can you get it to the federal office in time?" he said. "I'll write it myself," Caldwell said. "I'll leave tomorrow morning the moment she hands it to me." Cole turned back to Amelia. "What do you need?" he said. "Coffee," she said. "And nobody talking to me for 12 hours. She worked through the night and into the pre-dawn, and Cole did not talk to her, and he did not go to bed either. He moved quietly around the edges of the work. He kept the lamp filled. He put food beside her hand that she ate without looking at it. He brought her a blanket at some point past midnight when the mountain temperature dropped and she hadn't noticed because she was too deep in the argument she was building on paper. At 4 in the morning, she looked up and found him sitting in the chair by the window, awake with his hat on his knee and his eyes on her with an expression she had never seen from him before. Open, unguarded, the look of a man who had stopped pretending that what was happening was only about a ranch. She did not say anything about it. She looked back at her work. At 5:15, she set down her pen and said, "It's done." Cole stood up immediately. He crossed to the table and picked up the document and read it. All of it. He read carefully the way he did everything, and when he finished, he looked up and said, "This is the best thing you've ever written." "I know," she said. "I'm not just saying that." "I know that too," she said. He held her gaze for a moment, and then he walked to the door and called for Caldwell, who had slept in the barn at his own insistence and was already awake and saddled. Caldwell took the document, looked at the first page, looked at Amelia. "God willing," he said. "God willing," she agreed. He rode out before sunrise. The next 3 days were the hardest kind of waiting, the kind where there was still work to be done, but the most important thing was entirely out of your hands. Amelia used the time to prepare for every version of the continued hearing she could envision. She drilled McAllister on his testimony. She walked Dale Morrow through the questions Harrington's lawyer was likely to ask, and coached him on how to answer, not to change what he said, but to say it in a way that couldn't be twisted. She wrote out the counter-argument to Ida Marsh's statement and gave it to Cole to memorize, because she was not the one who should deliver it in court. He was. He was the rancher. He was the name on the land. His word about what had and had not happened in his own house carried weight that hers could not in this county, not with Harrington's story still in the air. Cole listened to everything she told him. He practiced the way a man practiced something he didn't enjoy but understood was necessary, without complaint, with full attention, getting better each time. On the second evening, he sat across the table from her, and she played Harrington's lawyer and asked him the hardest questions she could construct, and he answered them, and by the end of it, she sat back and said, "You're ready." He looked at her. "You sure?" he said. "You've been ready," she said. "You've known this ranch and this land and your father's history your whole life. I just helped you organize what you already knew." He was quiet for a moment. "That's not all you did," he said. "Cole," she said. "I'm not going to make a speech," he said. "I just want to say one thing." She waited. "When this is over," he said, "whatever you decide, about Denver, about here, about any of it, I want you to know that you have a place here as long as you want it. Not as a hand, not as an account keeper." He stopped. "As whatever you want to be." She looked at him across the table with all the documents between them, all the careful work of 6 weeks, all the conversations that had started as strategy and ended as something else. "Let's get through the hearing first," she said. "Yes," he said. "But after?" "After," she said. "Yes." He nodded once and picked up his coffee, and that was for the moment enough. On the 5th day, Caldwell came back. He rode in at mid-afternoon faster than he'd left, and the way he dismounted told Amelia everything before he opened his mouth. Not defeat, but urgency. The controlled urgency of someone carrying news that required immediate action. He came inside and sat down and put a document on the table. "The Federal Circuit Court has opened a formal investigation," he said. "The circuit judge, his name is Alderman. He's out of Helena, received your filing and reviewed it yesterday morning. He's already in the territory." Caldwell paused. "He arrived in Caldwell an hour after I left this morning. He's at the hotel right now." The room went very still. Cole said, "He's already here." "He's already here," Caldwell confirmed. "And he's issued a hold on the county hearing pending his review. Reeves can't proceed." He looked at Amelia. "The federal investigation is formally open. Harrington's local filing is suspended." Amelia sat with that for a moment. She had written that federal complaint at 5 in the morning on no sleep, with cold coffee, and the particular clarity of desperation, and it had worked. She had made the argument clearly enough. The clerk who read it had passed it to the judge, who was already in the territory closer than anyone knew, and Judge Alderman had read it and acted on it within 24 hours. She pressed both hands flat on the table. "When does Alderman want to meet?" she said. "Tomorrow morning," Caldwell said. "He wants to speak to you. Not Cole. You." Cole looked at Caldwell. "Why her?" "Because your filing identified her as the primary investigator of record," Caldwell said. He looked at Amelia. "He wants to understand how you assembled the case." Amelia looked at the tin box. "Then I'll be there," she said. Judge Alderman was not what she had expected. She had built a picture in her mind of a formal man distant, the kind of federal authority that made you feel the weight of the institution behind him. What she found instead was a man of 55 with road dust on his coat and eyes that had looked at a great many documents and a great many people telling different stories about the same facts and had gotten very good at knowing which was which. He met her at the Hotel Neutral Ground, his choice, with a clerk and no one else. He looked at the tin box she set on the table between them. "Tell me," he said, "how you found it." She told him. She told him the whole of it. The ledgers, crosses overcharging. Ruth Egan's document, McAllister's testimony, the pattern that connected 15 individual instances of coercion into a single systematic operation. She told him about Farr's statement and why it was false. She told him about Ida Marsh and why that too was fabricated. She told him about the map of compromised local judges and what it suggested about how deeply Harrington had embedded himself in the territory's legal structure. She spoke for 40 minutes without stopping, and Alderman listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at the documents she had laid out across the table. He said, "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" "I haven't," she said. "I kept books. I know numbers. I know what a ledger looks like when something is wrong." He looked at her. "Miss Carter," he said, "I have been a federal circuit judge for 11 years. I have reviewed land fraud cases across 4 territories. What you've assembled here is as thorough a documented case as I have seen from a trained attorney." He paused. "What you haven't been is lucky. You've been precise." She looked at him. "Can you stop him?" she said. "Yes," Alderman said. "With what you've given me and what I'll obtain through the federal investigation." "Yes. It won't be instant. These things take time even when the evidence is clear. But the land claim against the Dawson Ranch is suspended as of this morning, and it will not proceed at the county level." He paused. "I need you to understand what comes next. There will be federal proceedings. Harrington will fight every step. You may be called as a witness. Are you prepared for that?" "Yes," she said. He looked at her steadily. "You came to this county 6 weeks ago with nothing," he said. "It wasn't unkind. It was simply precise." "Yes," she said. "And you built this," he said. He gestured at the documents on the table. "Cole Dawson opened his gate," she said. "Ruth Egan kept her husband's papers for 5 years waiting for someone to use them. Thomas McAllister carried a secret he should have told years ago and then told it when it mattered. Dale Morrow signed his name to something that cost him courage." She paused. "I organized it, but I didn't build it alone." Alderman looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "But someone had to see that it could be built. That was you." He closed the folder in front of him. "Go back to the Dawson Ranch, Miss Carter. I'll be in contact within the week." She stood. She picked up the tin box. At the door she stopped. "Judge Alderman," she said. He looked up. "There are 15 names on a list in that box," she said. "People who lost their ranches, their land, their livelihoods to the same scheme. Harrington still holds most of those properties. Is there—" She stopped. "Is there anything that can be done for them?" Alderman looked at her for a moment. "In cases of documented fraud," he said carefully, "federal courts have ordered the restitution of property. It's not common, it takes time, and it's never complete." He paused. "But it's not nothing." She nodded. "Thank you," she said. She walked out into the summer morning with the tin box under her arm and the document of the federal investigation in her coat pocket, and the main street of Caldwell was going about its business around her. Horses' voices, the sound of the farrier's hammer somewhere down the street, and she thought, "It's not over. It will not be over for a long time." There are months of proceedings ahead, and witnesses and Harrington's lawyers working every angle, and the weight of 15 years of damage that cannot be undone in a week or a season, or perhaps even a year. But the land claim was suspended. The Dawson Ranch was standing, and Harrington for the first time in 15 years was afraid. She walked to her horse and rode home. Cole was waiting at the gate, not pacing, not anxious, just standing at the gate with his hat on and his arms loose at his sides, the way he stood when he was watching something he cared about and didn't want to perform any feeling about it. She pulled up and looked at him. "Well," he said. "Federal investigation is open," she said. "Land claim is suspended. Alderman wants me as a witness for the proceedings." Cole looked at her. "It's done," he said. "This part of it," she said. "The rest will take time. The other ranchers on the list Alderman said there may be restitution proceedings. It won't be quick." She paused. "But yes, this part is done." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened the gate. It was the same gesture he had made the first evening she had ever stood at this gate. The same simple motion, the same wordless invitation. But it was not the same at all, and they both knew it, and neither of them said so, because some things are understood more completely in silence. She rode through. He fell into step beside her horse, walking back up toward the ranch house, and for a while, neither of them spoke. The summer afternoon was full of bird sound, and the distant noise of cattle, and the particular quality of mountain light that landed differently up here than anywhere she had lived before, harder and cleaner, and somehow more honest. Cole said, "McAllister wants to stay on through the proceedings. He said he'll bunk in the barn if we'll have him." "We'll have him," she said. Cole looked at her sideways. She caught it. "We," she said. "Yes." Something shifted in his expression, quiet, deep, the kind of shift that doesn't announce itself. "Dale Morrow asked me this morning," he said, "if there was any chance of work on the ranch come fall. Said his place is gone, and he's got nothing holding him to the East Ridge." "What did you tell him?" she said. "I told him I'd ask the person who manages the accounts," Cole said. She almost smiled. "Tell him yes." "Thought so," he said. They reached the yard, and she dismounted, and Cole took her horse without being asked, and she stood for a moment in the yard that had been empty when she first walked through the gate and was not empty. Now McAllister sitting on the porch. Caldwell's horse still tied at the rail, the sound of voices from the barn where someone was working. She looked at it all. She thought about the woman who had stood at this gate 6 weeks ago with a battered valise and no money and no plan. Beyond the next hour, who had asked for a chance and not for sympathy, who had believed that being believed was still possible, somewhere even after Denver, even after Whitmore, even after a whole town had closed its doors in the same afternoon. She thought about what it had taken. Not just the documents and the letters and the sleepless nights, though, all of that, but the smaller things. Cole not asking her to explain herself when she sat down with the account books. Ruth Egan, opening a tin box she'd been keeping for 5 years. McAllister writing from Wyoming at 70 years old because he had owed a truth long enough. Dale Morrow signing his name to a paper in a kitchen while his hands shook slightly and he signed anyway. None of them had been saved. All of them had chosen. That evening after supper, when McAllister had gone to the barn and the last of the horses were settled and the ranch was quiet. In the way it got quiet after a day of real work. Cole came and sat on the porch steps, and Amelia sat beside him, not across from him, beside him, which was different from where she had sat every other evening, and neither of them commented on it. After a while, Cole said, "I need to ask you something." She waited. "What do you want?" he said. "Not from the case, not from the ranch. You." He paused. "A woman who can do what you do, you could go anywhere. Denver. Any city in the territory. You could find work with any firm that has sense enough to hire you." He looked at the mountains. "What do you want?" She sat with the question. It was not a question she had been asked very often. People had asked her what she could do, what she knew, what she was worth in measurable terms. Almost no one had asked what she wanted, as if the answer were assumed to be something modest and practical and not worth investigating. "I want to stop moving," she said. "I've been moving since I was 17. A farm, a city, another city, and then this, all of it looking for something solid." She paused. "I didn't know what solid felt like until I sat down with those account books and understood what I was looking at." "The fraud," he said. "The problem," she said. "Something real that needed solving and the tools to solve it." She paused. "I want that. I want to keep doing that. There are people all through this territory who have the same thing. Your father had accounts, they can't read agreements that don't mean what they were told. Men like Harrington finding the soft places." She looked at her hands. Caldwell mentioned there are other counties. Other ranchers who've had dealings with him and don't know what to do about it. Cole was quiet for a long time. "You're thinking about doing this again," he said. "The investigation. The affidavits." "I'm thinking that someone should," she said. He was quiet again. Then he said, "You could do it from here." She looked at him. "The ranch," he said. "You could use it as a base. The work you do, letters, records, investigations, you don't need to be in a city for that. You need a desk and a lamp and a post office." He paused. "We have all three." She looked at him carefully, because she had learned to read the space between what Cole Dawson said and what he meant. "Cole," she said, "I'm not asking you to stay out of convenience," he said. "I'm asking you to stay because this place is better with you in it, and I am better with you in it, and I have not said that to another person in longer than I can remember, and I don't say it lightly." She looked at him. He looked back at her, the way he had looked at the federal filing. Full attention. Nothing held back, all of himself present in it. "I'm not good at the things you're good at," he said. "I'm not easy to know, and I'm not easy to live with, and I have spent 3 years turning this ranch into something between a home and a fortress, and I know that." He stopped. "But I know how to work. I know how to be steady. And I know that the woman who walked through my gate 6 weeks ago is the most capable and the most honest person I have ever met, and that is not a small thing to me." Amelia sat with all of that for a moment. She thought about Denver. She thought about the trading company and the dismissed position and the long trip to a town she'd never heard of to meet a man who had never meant a word he wrote. She thought about standing on the main street of Caldwell with every door closed against her, and nothing but a postmaster's casual suggestion and her own stubborn refusal to sleep on the ground. She thought about a gate opening. "Ask me," she said. "Not around it. Ask me." Cole looked at her. "Stay," he said. "Not as a hand or an account keeper. Stay as the woman I want beside me. Stay and do the work you want to do, and let this be the solid thing you were looking for." He paused. "Stay." She looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. He had not been certain she could see that the residue of not having been certain, and the yes landed in him the way things landed in men who had stopped expecting them. "Just yes," he said. "Just yes," she said. "It's a complete answer." Something moved across his face that was not quite a smile and was more than one. He reached out and took her hand. Not dramatically, not with any flourish. Just took it and held it, the way a man holds something he intends to keep. And they sat on the porch steps of the Dawson Ranch while the summer night came in across the mountain and the stars came out one by one over the peaks, and the cattle settled in the lower pasture, and the ranch that had been built by one generation and held by another breathed around them. In the months that followed, Victor Harrington's land operation came apart the way things built on false foundations come apart slowly at first, then all at once. The federal investigation took 4 months. Alderman was thorough, and he was patient, and he was, as far as Amelia could tell, genuinely incorruptible, which was rarer in the territory than it should have been. Harrington's lawyers fought every document and every witness, and lost on each one. Not dramatically. Not in the single decisive courtroom moment that stories like to build toward, but steadily piece by piece, the way the truth usually won when it had been properly organized. The land claim against the Dawson North pasture was formally dismissed on a Tuesday in October. Amelia was in the kitchen when Cole rode back from the hearing in Billings and walked through the door and set the dismissal document on the table in front of her without a word, and she picked it up and read it and set it back down, and they looked at each other, and she thought 4 months of work. 6 weeks before that. A whole summer spent making sure this piece of paper would say what it said. "It's done," he said. "It's done," she agreed. He sat down across from her, and they drank coffee together in the way they had drunk it every morning for 4 months now, comfortable and quiet and familiar in all the ways that mattered. Of the 15 names on Ruth Egan's list, 7 received restitution of some form. 2 had their properties returned outright. 5 received federal compensation for the documented fraud. It was not everything, and it was not nothing, and it was what the law could do when someone took the time to make it move. Harrington himself was charged with 3 counts of federal land fraud. He would not see a courtroom verdict for another year, but the charges alone were enough. His operation collapsed. The properties he had accumulated began to dissolve back through the mechanisms of law and restitution and sale, and the quiet empire he had built for 15 years in the territory came apart piece by piece, the same way it had been built slowly and then all at once. Edmund Farr was formally discredited. Ida Marsh, when confronted with the evidence that she had given false testimony, recanted within a week and named the man who had paid her to do it. That name went into the federal record. Gerald Moore never spoke publicly about Amelia Carter again. The following spring, Amelia Carter opened a small office in the back room of the Dawson Ranch house. She had a desk and a lamp, and access to the post office in Caldwell, and within 6 months, people from 3 counties were writing to her ranchers, homesteaders, small landowners who had looked at their accounts and found something wrong, and didn't know what to do about it, or who had been approached by men with documents and threats, and no one to help them see the document for what it was. She charged what people could pay. Sometimes that was money. Sometimes it was a side of beef, or a winter's worth of firewood, or the labor of someone's son for a week of fencing. She did not turn anyone away for inability to pay, and she did not once find a case that wasn't worth investigating. Mrs. Plummer sent her 3 referrals in the first month alone. Dale Morrow worked the Dawson Ranch through the fall and stayed on through the winter and was still there. Come spring, a steady and reliable presence, who had found that having his story told publicly had lifted something he'd been carrying for 6 years. Thomas McAllister went back to Wyoming in November. He wrote letters regularly to Cole, to Amelia, detailed and precise letters, full of the kind of information a man accumulates over 70 years of watching the territory change. He was, Cole said, the most prolific letter writer he had ever known. Ruth Egan's tin box went to the federal court as evidence. A copy of every document in it lived on the shelf in Amelia's office, because she had learned from Ruth that some things were worth keeping, that a woman who held on to the truth long enough would eventually find someone who could use it. On a warm evening in the June. After all of it, a full year since a woman with a battered valise had stood at a gate she'd never expected to find and asked for a chance instead of sympathy. Cole Dawson stood on his porch and watched the mountain go gold in the last of the evening light, and listened to the sound of Amelia's pen moving in the office behind him. He had asked her in April. Quietly at the kitchen table, in the way he did most important things without ceremony, directly with all of himself present in it. She had said yes in exactly the same way she'd said it the first time. Just yes. It was a complete answer. They had been married in May, with Caldwell officiating and McAllister as witness, and Mrs. Plummer crying with the specific satisfaction of a woman who had seen a thing coming and was vindicated by its arrival. Now Cole stood on his porch in the evening quiet and looked at the land his father had held for 30 years through stubbornness and error and love, and the land he had held for 3 more years through grief and solitude and work, and thought about what his father had said. That land wasn't what you owned, it was what you were responsible for. He thought his father had been right as far as it went, but he had learned something his father hadn't said, or maybe hadn't known. That what you were responsible for could grow. That responsible wasn't only a fence line and a water right and a cattle count. It was also the people on the land, and the people around it, and the ones who came to the gate with nothing and deserved a fair chance to prove what they were worth. The pen stopped moving in the office behind him. He heard her chair push back. He heard her steps cross the floor. She came and stood beside him on the porch and looked at the mountain the same way he was looking at it, and after a while she said, "I got a letter from a woman in Judith Basin. Her husband died last winter and left debts that don't look right. She thinks someone's taking advantage." Cole said. "I'll write to her tomorrow," Amelia said. "I know," he said. She looked at him sideways. He looked at her. They had been talking like this for almost a year, in the shorthand of people who had gone through something real together and come out the other side, knowing each other in ways that took other people decades. The shorthand of shared work and shared worry, and the quiet accumulation of all the evenings they had sat together and done what needed to be done. Cole reached out and took her hand the same way he had on the porch steps the night she said yes, not dramatically, just steadily, with the intention of keeping, and she let him. And they stood together in the evening, while the mountain went dark behind the peaks, and the cattle moved somewhere in the lower pasture, and the ranch that had almost been taken breathed around them solid and whole, and filled now with something it had been missing for a long time. Not just land, not just work, not just survival, a life that 2 people had chosen out loud on purpose, after everything that had tried to stop them, and a woman who had arrived with nothing, had turned out to be exactly what this mountain needed. The kind of person who reminded everyone around her that a chance given honestly was never wasted, that the person the world counted out was often the one who ended up changing it, and that sometimes the most important gate in a person's life was not the one they left through, but the one someone else had the courage to open.